welcome to Deep Cuts, a show that's dedicated to exploring the good, the bad, and the gory in all your favorite horror movies. I'm your host, Matthew Bolton, and today we're talking about the 1996 seminal horror film that changed the genre forever, Scream. The film was written by newcomer Kevin Williamson, and after falling months behind on his bills and taking a house-sitting job in Palm Springs, he found himself watching a docu-series on real-life serial killer Danny Rolling. And after getting a little spooked by being scared in the house alone, he decided to write Scream. Not only did he write Scream, then titled Scary Movie, he also wrote 2 treatments for Scream 2 and Scream 3. Kevin delivered the script to his literary agent on a Friday, and by Monday it had been sold to Dimension Films. The next thing they had to do was find a director, and early on they reached out to horror director and legend Wes Craven, who unfortunately turned it down because he said it was too tough and violent, and he didn't know if he wanted to go to that place again. But after meeting a young fan and being asked when he'd make another kick-ass horror film again, and after hearing that Drew Barrymore had been cast as one of the film's leads, Wes Craven was all in. And in the spring of 1996, on a $15 million budget, the cast and crew of Scream made one of the most powerful and original horror films in history. So let's get right to the film that made everybody invest in caller ID, shall we? The film opens on a flirtatious game of phone tag between Casey Becker, played by Drew Barrymore, and a mysterious voice on the other line. Things quickly turn for the worse when the mysterious voice becomes more threatening and lets Casey know he is just outside her door. In order to save her and her captive boyfriend Steve's life, Casey is forced to play the killer's game. After asking her some pretty simple horror movie trivia, Casey is forced to watch her boyfriend Steve die after she answers a layup question about Friday the 13th wrong. After that, all things go to hell for Casey as the killer breaks into her house and chases her around a bit before ultimately catching Casey as she ran outside for help. A couple of fun facts about this sequence. Director Wes Craven was actually wearing the Ghostface costume when Drew Barrymore swings the phone and hits him through the window. Actually hit him in the face that night because it was kind of wet and raining in the area. Also, another fun fact, if you didn't know, the house that's across the street from Casey Becker's house is the house from Cujo. Let's get back to it. Now with a gnarly stab wound in her chest and unable to scream for help due to being choked by Ghostface, Casey nearly misses being saved by her parents, who are too busy talking about their flowers to notice her. Once inside, the Beckers try to locate Casey and try the police, only to hear the last breaths of Casey on the line. As much as it bothers me that Casey never drops the phone while being brutally murdered, it's totally worth the payoff here. Nothing is creepier than the mom picking up to call 911 and hearing her daughter's dying breaths on the other line. Audiences were shocked that the filmmakers would kill off Barrymore so early in the film, but it's just one more thing that makes this movie stand out as such a classic. The reason the film sped up so much on that last shot on Barrymore was due to the fact that the MPAA was struggling giving this film an R rating with all of its violence. Next we meet Sidney Prescott and her boyfriend Billy Loomis as Billy climbs through Sidney's window, hoping for some play, but Sid's not feeling it. Most likely due to the fact that her mother, Maureen, was brutally raped and murdered a year prior. With Dad breaking in to disrupt the fun, Billy gets lost, and the next day at school, everything is crazy, with a massive police presence and local and national news outlets covering the story. This feels all too familiar for Sidney, who gets the lowdown from what happened the night before at the Beckers from her best friend Tatum. This is also where we see the first of 2 small cameos by seasoned horror actor Linda Blair. Tatum's brother Dewey assists the sheriff in questioning Sidney later in the day with the help of Principal Principal Himbry, who creepily gropes Sid's chin. Yeah, I agree, Sheriff Burke. That's fucking weird. They cut Sid some slack on behalf of her mother being murdered a year prior, and after school, Sidney and her crew hang around the school fountain talking. In addition to Billy and Tatum, we meet the group's resident movie freak, Randy, and Tatum's boyfriend, Stu. The group makes fun of the horrible situation that's going on in their town, and Sidney is not amused. Sidney heads home, where she's lucky enough to catch a few outlets reporting on the Casey Becker story. Shout out to the movie's casting director, Lisa Beach here. Sidney lands on a top-story broadcast recapping the events of Sidney's mother's murder once again. After becoming frustrated with the subject matter, Sid turns off the TV and wanders throughout her massive house to find one of her many couches to take a nap on. Later, Tatum calls to wake Sid from her slumber and to let her know that she's running late. Soon after Sid hangs up though, the phone rings again. Only this time, it's our mystery voice on the other line. After not buying the act, Sidney calls out the voice by walking out on her front porch to pick her nose and prove the killer can't see her. I do have to say, the Scream movies do this very well. They give us a great pressure release built into the story and a great little comedy moment before ripping off the band-aid and sending us down a holy shit, the killer just goes right after her like that inside of her own house? He almost has the upper hand on her, but as we'll find out throughout this series, you don't fuck with Sidney Prescott. Not listening to her own advice though, Sid runs up the stairs and locks herself in her room. To use her photonic def typer 2 to call/type the cops. Unfortunately, the film cut this out, but the address that Sid types in is 1428 Elm Street, as a nice little nod to director Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street. Ghostface disappears and Billy comes flying through the side window, giving us yet another jump scare from Billy as he enters a room. He apparently doesn't know how to just walk up and say hello to anyone in this film. Now inside comforting Sidney, Billy drops his cell phone on the floor. Since this was a time before everyone had cell phones and addictions to them, Sidney is rightfully suspicious and runs away from Billy, only to run out the door into a "Holy shit, it's Ghostface!" Nope, actually it's Deputy Dewey doing what he does best.
Found this. Come on!
Billy is arrested and then taken to the station for questioning, where he continuously gives murder stares to Sid while proclaiming his innocence. While trying to escape Billy's creep eye, Sid and Tatum are taken out the back door of the police station, only to be greeted by Gail Weathers and the rest of the media circus outside. Sid brings up the book that Gail has been writing about her mother's death, and Gail falls for the wolf in sheep's clothing act and takes a mean right hook to the face before Sid heads over to a sleepover at Tatum's for the night. The safe vibes of friendship don't last long, however, as Sid receives a call from our good old friend Ghostface, leaving Sid to realize Billy is innocent and that she may have accused the wrong guy. This plays out the next day at school when Gail and Sidney chat about Cotton Weary, and how Sid's testimony was the key reason he went away for her mother's murder. Only now, Sid isn't so sure of anything anymore. Things don't get any easier for Sid during the school day, with students running through the halls wearing the same Ghostface mask the killer wears, and Billy being a complete douche to her about her mother's death and their relationship. Moments later, the bitchiest mean girl at the school decides to tell her friends about how much of a slut Sid's mom was, while Sid hides in one of the stalls. Once they leave, however, Sid is stalked and attacked again by the real Ghostface. Writer Kevin Williamson almost deleted this scene from the script, but after talking to Wes Craven, who asked him to keep it in, I'm really glad they did. It has one of my favorite reveals of the entire franchise, as Ghostface steps off the toilet and drops his robes down. It's subtle and very effective, and it sets up the shoes that the killer and seemingly everybody in the town of Woodsboro wears. After school, Sid is invited to a curfew party over at Stu's parents' house since they're out of town, and cautiously accepts. Back at the school though, Principal Himbry is playing around with one of the confiscated Ghostface masks he took from some students earlier, and yells at Fred, the janitor, played by Wes Craven himself. Unfortunately, Principal Himbry meets Ghostface firsthand with a game of stabby stab before being finished off with a great shot of Ghostface being revealed and reflected in his eye. This scene wasn't in the original script, but after producer Bob Weinstein noticed that nobody was getting killed off in this movie for almost an hour after the first scene, he forced Kevin Williamson to write it in. Reluctant at first, he's quoted for saying it was really helpful to help get the students out of the house at the end of the film, something he'd been struggling with how to figure out for a while. We catch up with Randy and Stu at the video store, and Stu tells Randy he thinks Sidney's dad is the killer, while Randy loses his shit over the fact that the killer could be anyone.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
Randy thinks the killer could be Billy, and Billy confronts Randy with Stu, giving off even more creepy serial killer vibes. I mean, I would chill the fuck out if I were already on the police radar and a suspect, but I digress. Sid and Tatum go to get some food shopping done before the party later, while Dewey and Sheriff Burke are enjoying their vices, talking about how the killer could possibly be Sidney's father, who they cannot locate. I've always loved how every time Sheriff Burke takes a pull off of his smoke, Dewey takes a pull off of his ice cream cone.
Neil Prescott, Sidney's father. You made the calls with a cellular phone. It's been confirmed.
Well, there's no way a cellular could have been cloned.
The sheriff is played by Joseph Whipp, who played a police officer in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Before I continue on though, I gotta talk about Scene 118. In the finale of the script, it's just simply written as Scene 118, and this amounts for the last 40 minutes of the movie. Shot over 21 nights at the same location, the cast and crew even had shirts made that said, "I survived Scene 118," because of the toll it took on everybody. Night falls and everybody heads to the party at Stu's place, which is already bumping. So bumping that even a cop doesn't care about the underage drinking because he's trying to look cool and get some of that sweet Gail Weathers action. Gail hides a prehistoric GoPro in the house to watch the goings-on, and pissed at her dorky brother for crashing her party, Tatum runs to reload on the beer from the fridge in the garage, only to be locked out. She tries to go around through the garage door and is surprised when Ghostface shows up, locking her inside. Tatum thinks it's Randy or one of the others playing a prank on her and doesn't approach Ghostface with an ounce of caution, but soon realizes how real the situation is after the killer cuts her arm. Tatum seems to turn into Jackie Chan for a bit and uses anything at her disposal to escape the killer. With Ghostface on his back, Tatum tries to squeeze through the doggy door, but is faced with the reality that she's stuck and definitely fucked. Oh! After Tatum's death, Ghostface moves back into the party, and things begin to die down. Sydney's on her way out when, Jesus! Another jump scare from Billy as he enters a room. Billy and Sydney go upstairs to talk, and Randy talks to Stu about how things could have been. Billy and Sydney talk in an upstairs bedroom about their feelings and other boring topics before Sydney decides she's ready to have sex. At the same time, Stu and Randy and a bunch of day players watch Halloween, while Randy explains the rules to stay alive in a horror movie.
Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. Big no-no!
While Billy and Sydney break each of those rules. The party is interrupted when a random call that Randy decides to pick up informs them that Principal Himbry is gutted and strung up on the school's football field. Everybody but Randy takes off and heads to the school, almost running over Dewey and Gail in the process, who finally break the sexual tension to make out a bit before spotting Sydney's dad's car in the woods and running back to the house thinking he's the killer. Billy and Sydney are back in the bedroom, getting themselves decent again when Ghostface busts through to stab Billy a bunch of times, before chasing Sydney around the house. In this scene, Ghostface wipes the blood off of the knife. This is something that the stuntman who played Ghostface in 3 of the 4 Scream movies improvised, and it ended up becoming a signature trait of the character. Ghostface chases Sydney throughout the house and ultimately to the creepy attic where she narrowly escapes him by falling off the roof onto a conveniently placed boat. She then sees Tatum and doesn't have much time to mourn her loss before having to run away to find help. Meanwhile, Randy is inside alone, finishing Halloween on the couch when Ghostface approaches him, almost killing him before hearing Sydney's screams from outside and pursuing her. I don't really know how Randy didn't hear the screams at this moment, but that's beside the point. The only person around at this point is Gail's cameraman Kenny, and before he can be of any assistance, Ghostface slices his throat and drops Kenny like a ton of bricks. Sydney narrowly escapes again through a small utility hole in the back of the van that Ghostface can't fit through, giving Sydney enough time to run away. Dewey and Gail arrive back at the house, and Dewey goes inside the house while Gail tries to call for help. Finding her van covered in Kenny's blood, Gail quickly moves into the van to call for help, but is spooked by Randy, who takes a few hard shots to the face from a giant fucking cell phone. Gail tosses the van into drive and starts to get the fuck out of Dodge when Kenny's body defies the laws of physics and flops forward onto the windshield, blocking Gail's view and causing her to swerve and almost hit Sydney before successfully hitting a nearby tree. Sydney runs back to the house before seeing Dewey exiting with a knife in his back. Ghostface then chases Sydney back into Dewey's cruiser in an amazingly choreographed sequence that still gets me tensed up to this day. Sydney is able to escape that and runs away from the cruiser only to see that Ghostface is gone. She runs over and grabs Dewey's gun before Stu and Randy approach her begging to be saved, but luckily for Sid, she's a badass bitch. Once locked safely inside, Sydney sees Billy stumble and fall down an ungodly amount of stairs before she runs over to his aid. Billy gets to his feet and convinces Sid to hand over the gun before he lets Randy back into the house. Randy tells them that Stu has lost his mind and gone mad, only to be shot by Billy, who found this the appropriate time to quote a horror movie.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
No, Billy!
Billy reveals that his stabbing was a ruse, and Sydney quickly turns and runs into Stu, who reveals he's also one of the 2 killers. Billy and Stu torture and reveal that they were the ones who murdered Sydney's mother a year ago. Billy explains how Sydney's mother was sleeping with Billy's dad, and that Sid's mother was the reason that Billy's mother abandoned him. Based on the quote before, we all know that Billy's best friend was his mother. Billy and Stu plan to pin everything on Sydney's father, who's been tied up for the past few days in Stu's parents' pantry, much like how they pinned Maureen Prescott's murder on Cotton Weary. Luckily, nobody went in there during the party for snacks. In order for their plan to work, they need to take turns stabbing each other in order to sell the fact that they were just surviving victims of the killer. Billy, however, takes things a little too far and stabs Stu too many times, causing Matthew Lillard to amp up his performance to ludicrous speed for the remainder of the movie. Deciding to finish their plan, Stu goes for Dewey's gun, only it's not where he left it, leaving him to recite one of the many improvised lines throughout the remainder of the film.
Houston, we have a problem here.
What?
Unfortunately for Gail, she has no idea how guns work and left the safety on, allowing Billy to give her a swift kick to the gut, sending her back out onto the porch, knocking her out. He goes out there to finish her off, but during this time, Sydney used the distraction to escape with her father and call the police. She then turns the tables on the 2 killers and calls them to inform them they're up shit creek. This sends Billy into a fit of rage, tearing up the entire house. Unfortunately for Matthew Lillard, there was a lot of blood used on set, and when Billy throws the phone, it actually slipped out of his hands, hitting Lillard, giving us yet another great couple of improvised lines back to back. Billy finally thinks he's found Sid, but is distracted by Halloween playing on the TV in the other room. Sid attacks him with a fucking umbrella, taking him to the ground. Unfortunately for actor Skeet Ulrich in this scene, the second stab that hits him missed the plate that was hidden underneath his wardrobe, and he actually took most of the force of that stabbing to his chest. So that's not only great acting that's happening on there, that's real pain. Stu breaks out and attacks Sidney in an excellent ballet of stunt tumbles that ultimately leaves Stu with a face full of John Carpenter's Halloween. We get a pretty solid Randy jump scare, followed by another Billy jump scare, leading us to the final showdown. Billy thinks he's got Sid, but he forgot once again that Sid came to play, and she sticks a fucking finger in Billy's stab wound, and Gale uses this opportunity to pop a cap in his ass. Everyone rejoices and approaches Billy's body, with one final fanboy warning issued by Randy.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
Not in my movie.
Damn, you's a badass bitch, Sidney! The film concludes with Dewey being put into an ambulance and Gale giving us an exclusive from the front yard of Stu's parents' house, recapping the events of the night before. A nice long sunrise dissolve and one last ghost-faced jump scare. And there you have it, 1996's Scream, written by Kevin Williamson and directed by horror legend Wes Craven. This film made its characters self-aware, which changed the genre for the next decade to come. Be sure to subscribe if you liked this video, and I'll be back next week to talk about 1988's remake of The Blob. Until then, I'm Matthew Bolton, and this has been Deep Cuts. Thank you very much for watching my first video on my new channel, Bloody Ghost. I wanted a place where I could share my passion for horror movies with other fans who feel the exact same way. I had a blast making this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. So until next week, keep screaming.